really awesome.
All right. I invite the first speaker of the Affirmative team to come up and start their team's case.
Benji is the goat. He's the goat elephant. Let's try this. In a world where the media and pop culture is so powerful at defining people's conception of the world, I think it's incredibly damaging for it to tell us the only way you can be seen as gay in society is to make a big show of it and tell the whole world that you are gay. I think the point at which that's the narrative that we get shown, I think that's incredibly damaging. 2 points for the House. First, about how it focus on coming out alienates people from the LGBT movement, and then second, about why this leads to a lot of pressures that exist to make people come out. But before that, some setup. 2 points on this. Firstly, about how the LGBTQ media portrays coming out. I think there's 2 things I want to talk about. First then is that no, it's part of literally almost every single LGBTQ narrative. Noting that it's seen as a necessary part of being LGBT, the point at which they have to defend that exists literally to the scale at which it does in the present day. I think that's the point at which they understand, that's the context under which this debate lies. But second is that often note then that's quite unnuanced. That is to say that the demographic of artists that make this kind of content is generally quite narrow. This is for 3 reasons. Firstly, is because you need a large degree of privilege to be able to make this kind of art. That means that necessarily the kind of individuals making it are probably going to come from a small demographic. Secondly, note that the people making these content often had good experiences coming out, right? It means they're often very positive about their identity. It means that the point at which they're making this kind of content, because they're very positive, means that they're probably also going to have very narrow views. Third then is they often need to appeal to stereotypes of the movement. That is, art itself is profit driven. That is the point at which the kind of art you have to make necessarily needs to appeal to the stereotypes. That's the point at which it becomes unnuanced. The second point on setup then is about what is the likely counterfactual. What we think a likely counterfactual is that the media is going to focus on people who are more covertly LGBT. That is to say, people who don't expressly flaunt their identity. I think that's the point at which they're able to more covertly introduce LGBT characters. I think the point at which you're not actively making a big deal of coming out, that's the likely alternative. Okay, how will focus on coming out alienate people from the LGBT movement? The context of this point is that media has a large part of what defines the LGBTQ movement. This is for 2 reasons. First is that the movement is less predicated on attaining legal rights, but it's more actually focused on attaining liberal rights. That is to say, the acceptance of a majority of people to see that the LGBTQ movement is legitimate. I think that's why it's focused on the media, because that is what actually propagates those narratives. The second thing though is that media and pop culture are very strong mediums for social movements for 3 reasons. First is that it's easier for people to internalize these movements, the point at which they see it a lot in the media. The second is that they see the reflection of the artist's lives. That is, when they see people coming out in the stories that they watch, they probably think it's a reflection of the artist. They think it's generally a good thing. Thirdly then, it's easier to buy into these narratives when we see how they emotionally play out in this media. I think that's what's important. Okay, why is it damaging for the media to portray this? 2 things. First, the media normalizes coming out as a requirement of being part of that movement. This is because, firstly, when coming out is so prevalent in the media, people see it as a threshold as required to be like LGBT. That is, people who don't come out are just not seen as LGBT on their side. This is incredibly damaging because there are people who don't buy into the idea of needing to come out. It looks like people who are just more covertly gay, who are gay men who don't wear makeup, for example, or dress really stereotypically straight and are very straight passing. I think that's the point at which these people are probably less likely to buy into this movement. The point at which you're seen as a requirement to be gay, I think that's the point at which they're alienated. Second though is that there are a large amount of people who just don't have the capacity to come out, right? This is for 3 general reasons. Firstly, they probably don't have very strong support networks that mean that people probably don't have anything to lean on in case anything goes wrong. Second is that they often come from conservative families that just mean they often don't feel like that's a good thing. Third is they probably identify with strict religions that mean they think it's broadly coming out is going to be a bad thing. What are the impacts of this then? 2 things. First is that in the cases where people don't want to come out, they get alienated from the movement. Though then on the low end, they just feel like they're less connected to the LGBT movement. When they're seen as just not a part of it, it means they probably aren't able to identify with the movement. But then on the high end, they actually lose out on the support networks that are present in the movement, right? That is, they're probably going to lose out on people who see them as gay and are looking to support these individuals. The point at which they lose out on these, like the support network, is the point at which they question their own identity and they're unable to validate their own self-worth when their very identity and the parts that make up their identity actively reject them. The second thing it does, though, is it fractures the LGBTQ movement. That is, there is less social power when there is internal divide within the movement because people just disagree with themselves, or they're just unable to get consistent messaging about what it means to be gay, what are the thresholds required to be gay. I think the point at which the movement is fractured, they just gain less social power. Two ways into which to weigh this point in. Firstly is about the severity of harm that we accrue to these individuals. That is to say that when these people feel rejected by their community and they lose their support network, that's when they turn to things like self-harm at the point at which they're unable to understand that they are actually valid for who they are. That's the point at which there are severe consequences for these individuals who are cut out from their support network. But second is at the point of scale, right? That is, there is probably a large amount of individuals within this movement who don't feel the need to come out or who don't actively want to. I think the point at which those people are alienated, that's incredibly damaging. Before I move on, I'll take a point of information.
Queer media already focuses on the hypersexualization of queer individuals. Why do you not exacerbate that?
Because I think the idea of being covertly gay is, or just covertly LGBT, is I think the point at which, you're just able to just prove that, people of all spectrums exist and not just the hypersexualized versions. I think the point at which they glorify something like coming out is the point at which they play into certain stereotypes because they're already playing into the stereotype that you need to come out to be gay. Honestly, at the point at which you're already playing into one stereotype, there's a lot more stereotypes you can play into. Okay, why a lot of pressures exist to make people come out? The context here is that coming out isn't actually a necessary part of being LGBT. Noting that you don't have to overtly come out to your society to be a trans person, for example. It's just something that you internalize yourself. Also, you don't need to make glorified statements to a lot of individuals to say that you're coming out. Honestly, I don't think that's very necessary for these people. So then why are there lots of pressures to come out? Two reasons. First, that the media often glorifies coming out. That is to say three things. First, it always makes it seem like a big deal. That is, within the media, it necessarily is part of a big deal because it's seen as a big narrative turning point. I think this leads to the second point, is it often is portrayed as a turning point in what it means to be LGBT. The third then is it often depicted as overly positive. That is, I told you how there's a lot of incentives for these artists to depict it in a positive way because it leads to positive movements. I think that's the point at which they're often quite they're often glorified. But second is that people who don't feel part of the people don't feel part of the movement until they come out. That is to say that because the media depicts coming out as a necessary part of being LGBT, people have a lot of pressures to do that. Noting that these are individuals who probably come from backgrounds that are probably shun the movement for those ways. I think the point is that when these individuals come out, there are significant risks when they feel pressure to do so. Two impacts then. Firstly, there's a huge principal harm, right? That is, it's literally coercive, the point at which you force people to say or do something they feel uncomfortable with. The example I have is about Kit Connor from Heartstopper. The point at which he is publicly pressured from individuals to come out and express his identity is, I think, the point at which these people have a lot of coercive pressure to do something they don't want to do. That's a huge principal harm. But also noting that the result of coming out in poor ways often results to things like isolation, things like alienation, things like active discrimination. That is, if you feel pressure to come out while you're actively in a conservative environment, often the consequences are really large. That looks like being literally kicked out of your house, for example. I think that's the point at which there are significant harms. Honestly, I think the point at which there are such high harms, the point at which there are such risks for individuals who need to come out, when there is such big coercive pressures, I think that's akin to violence. The point at which you're forcing these people to do things that might ruin their lives, I think that's incredibly damaging. The second impact, though, is that you lose out on your family, right? These individuals who feel pressure to come out, they just lose out on the people who support them. That is, when the people see when a lot of people have a lot of straight friends that just see this kind of media and they're like, oh, you should really come out, you feel alienated from your own friends, right? I think that's the point at which these individuals lose out on support networks. I think it's incredibly damaging for these individuals to have these kinds of harms perpetrated against them. The weighing for this point is about the severity of harm. I think the point at which these people literally feel isolated or feel as though they have violence committed against them, that's the point at which we win this debate.
I thank the speaker for their speech and now welcome the first speaker of the Negating team.
So before I start my speech, I'll give a trigger warning that it mentions self-harm at one part. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, the affirming side have come up here and told us 2 effects that they told us is gonna happen, that happens from the focusing of coming out culture, right? So firstly, they talk about alienation, and then secondly, on how it pressures people to come out. Firstly, on the point about alienation, we're actually gonna flip this on them, and I'm gonna give mechanism throughout my substantive point on how it is on their side of the house that queer people actually get alienated, and I'll talk about that later on. Some points that I would like to address now though is on how, like, they said that like coming out is always glorified. We tell you that actually there are many shows that exist that showcase the negative side of coming out, where coming out doesn't actually show people being supported. It actually does show when there are negative feedback that comes from it. Because this is true, like this is representation, is accurate in real life. There are like negative reaction to coming out, and this is showcased through shows as well, right? And like they have like given no mechanism about like why negative reaction doesn't exist. We tell you that many shows exist that shows that accurately shows how there are negative reaction to coming out. Okay, and then they told us about like they talk about liberal rights and legal rights, right? Okay, so yes, we agree. Of course, we want legal rights. We want people to be accepted for who they are. But this is like the logical primacy to getting legal rights, because like people must first be accepted for who they are, which will like talk about how this is possible through the focus on coming out. But then after that, what comes after is them being able to obtain legal rights, such as like passing laws, etc., that prioritize or like that doesn't discriminate against gay people, right? And then so yeah, but overall we want to say that like on outside of the house, like, we see media does not glorify it, like, but we still we don't glorify coming out, but we still think that it is like an emotional process for queer people, like everybody out. For every queer people, even if they don't end up coming out at the end, it's still an emotional process that people go through, right? And like we think it's extremely important for it to be the focus within media. Okay, and then the pressure to come out. I'll talk about this throughout my substantive point. Okay, I have 2 points for you today. Firstly, on how the focus on coming out in LGBT media actually empowers the LGBT audience to feel heard and seen, which is actually that directly combats what they said. And then secondly, on how when there are no focus on coming out under their side of the house, it shifts focus specifically onto the relationship of the queer people and the harms of this. My second speaker split today will be on why TV show will be better quality or better written if the focus is on coming out, right? Okay, I'll take a point.
So you don't have to come out to every single individual in your friend group or in the society in order to like be LGBT. Why is it necessarily beneficial for this threshold to be a requirement?
Okay, yeah, like we agree, like you like don't have to come out to everybody, but like even if you come out to just one friend or just one parent, that is still coming out, and that is still something we think should have a focus on it. Okay, so I'll give some setup. So the focus on what coming out look like is when like this film that is like majorly made up of a person experience, right? So this could look like the experience of them leading up to it, how they plan for it, what they think about it, how it affects their day-to-day life, and how it also, and then after they come out, like how people around them react to it in their experience, etc. And then I'll talk about the counterfactual later in my speech. Okay, on the first substantive point, yeah. So when the focus looks like is like when this representation of the coming out journey, right? It showcases characters like build up to coming out to their family members or their friends. It looks like the characters' internal dialogue about fear, or like for example them thinking like, will they still love me if they know I'm queer? And then like how it shows struggles that they face. For example, like if they have a religious clash, being queer and then like being like Christian, for example, right? And then secondly, the focus will look like the audience support and empower celebrities to come out. So like for example, Harry Styles came out, right? And he received loads of support, like fans, and then fans who were LGBT felt very seen and heard that an artist they love so much is just like them. So how are they able to feel heard and seen by this focus, right? They see role models that they look up to as queer and see that they are alike in this sense. It helps them feel a sense of self-worth when people like when someone is like rich, beautiful, and famous is also queer like them. They see the support celebrities get from audience and are more open-minded to ideas that coming out doesn't always result in others hating you. Thirdly, they watch as characters go through similar things or challenges as them and they'll be able to relate to characters more, for example, like religious trauma. And then fourthly, like they can feel, in some cases, people are like incentivized to question sexuality, like for things that they never knew before about themselves, right? Okay. What are some impacts of this? Individuals in conservative families and community do not feel alone in their experience as a queer individual, right? They are no longer like harming themselves out of hatred of themselves and fear that they're the only one who thinks these things and feel that they have an illness. Secondly, non-queer audience also understand and empathize with queer issues. They're more worried and empathetic around queer people and their feelings. This looks like being patient or like not expecting all queer individuals to come out. It also looks like queer audience seeing themselves in the idols and having a sense of self-worth. People feel more supported to come out, and even if they don't come out, right, they still feel validated on their feelings, as the focus of the film is still on the leading up to the coming out, or the experience in day-to-day life on that. Okay, on to my second substantive point, right? When there is no focus on coming out, it actually shifts the focus specifically onto the relationship of the queer person. So this is likely because, like, for example, right, like for a straight person, when they see a queer person, they're likely to, the only thing they're only gonna see them as is like who they like or their sexuality, for example, right? And then like the media will reflect this strongly. This will mean that like they'll be reduced solely down to just their sexuality and nothing else. They'll focus on their relationship, which most of the time will be sexual relationships. So we can see it as extremely likely that like under their side of the house, there'll be like hypersexualization of queer people. Okay, more on why this is true, right? So there will be like focus on things of like hypersexualization, and they think that like queer people are like maniacs who are only like sex driven, right? And it will like, or they'll focus on their relationship and it like boils people worth down to just their relationship. And right, so and then some reasons for this is like actually because like, for example, when we think of like a gay male, right, they usually get like discriminated against by their male counterpart, and this makes it very hard for them to give their like emotional self to somebody. This means that what they're extremely likely to do is only to give their like physical self to somebody, which most of the time will mean through sexual relationship, which means that through these films there's gonna be like hypersexualization of them, and there's gonna focus on things that are not an accurate representation of queer people. It don't reach as many people as it may not be experienced by everybody. Meanwhile, coming out is a much more universal experience of everybody in the queer community, no matter their sexuality, right? So overall, like this means that like it's gonna focus on stereotypes of queer people who like that's not even gonna be true. So there's gonna be like inaccurate representation. They're gonna like leave gaps, and then like people like aren't able to like watch the representation of in the media of people coming out. They don't feel supported. They don't see like the leading up of coming out or like the reaction after it, right? And the people in these position will get less support to come out, and they will be stuck in these stereotypes, right? Okay, so what are the impacts of this? People feel like they must be in a relationship to be whole or to be worthy as a queer person. This would cause alienation for them actually, because it caused like less validation for these queer people, and people who don't engage in sexual relationship or just being in a relationship, whether that be because like of like family restrictions or because of their own personal choice. This means especially for, let's say, like asexual people, right? They feel like just because they don't engage in sex, this means that they're like not straight enough but also not gay enough. And then also society will respond to this in two ways. Either they like grossly hypersexualize it, or they see it as so gross and disgusting, and they're just gonna hate on all queer people overall. And these are just some horrible impacts that outside do not stand for. Therefore, I'm proud to negate. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for their speech. I now invite up the second speaker of the affirmative team.
So Negating wants to talk about vulnerable people getting their experiences captured. The problem is that media never had the capacity to do that. Media was always likely to over-dramatize these situations, always likely to set an unrealistic plotline, and that's precisely why they can't reach those outcomes, and the most vulnerable people in the LGBTQ plus community are worse off. Few things I'm going to talk about. Firstly, dealing with the pressure on the counterfactual, explaining why the counterfactual is not hypersexuality. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how the media responds to this, and in there I'm going to integrate my split point as to why people are still able to come out on our side of the house. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about weighing and explain, just broadly why our material should weigh higher than theirs. So, firstly, in terms of hypersexuality, there are 3 reasons why this isn't the likely counterfactual. Firstly, this is obviously going to cause a huge amount of backlash. Just like how women don't like being hypersexualized in every show, LGBTQ plus people won't either, which means that they're likely to not watch these shows. Boycott them, get Twitter to go ahead and cancel them. Secondly, is that most media doesn't want to just hypersexualize people, because if people react poorly to queer people being over-sexualized, as they say it is, that's a reason to not include it in your media, because otherwise people will react badly to that and not want to watch your show. Thirdly, is that the lowest capacity change is just having queer people in your show and skip that part of them coming out. And note, their whole thing is completely different sidelights, completely different queer people. This is incredibly different as to what the actual status quo is. It is incredibly unclear as to why the change is going to occur. A far more believable change is instead that this is just going to skip that process of coming out, and we're not going to have those kinds of plot lines. Next, let's talk about how media reacts to this. And here I want to start off with my split point on why people will still come out. I think that there are some people that will want to come out because, they just internally have these feelings, because they just genuinely want to express themselves, and because, they value this as a part of their identity. I think that relatively that's what First Nick was talking about. So, on our side, they can just go to things like Twitter. They can just go to that gay person they know. They can just go to the gay teacher they know. There are a lot of gay people out there, a lot of trans people out there, a lot of people in the LGBTQ plus community. I'm sure a lot of us know many of those people, so there are many of those networks accessible towards people. That means that people that are desperate to come out can still go ahead and access them for advice, access them to get those nuanced portrayals which they want to talk about, which lets them go ahead and come out. There are a couple reasons as to why this is far better than the counterfactual of using the media. Firstly, the media is likely to unnecessarily glorify this, as Bruce outlined to you. And the core reason for this is that stories need to have emotional satisfaction and follow the narrative structure. This respects 2 main things. Firstly, it means you make the stakes high. It means you over dramatize it. It means you set up this closeted character with incredibly homophobic parents, and then these people come out despite this incredibly awful community, where it would be probably a pretty terrible idea to come out if you were actually in that community. And the obvious reasons to why you want to do this is to make your story interesting, is to make people want to go ahead and watch it, because obviously just a bland story in which a person has parents that maybe sort of slightly homophobic and sort of react weirdly, but sort of accept you anyways at the end of the day, isn't actually an interesting plotline, right? But secondly, is that they make their endings overly positive, because the climax of that character went for a climax. They went through all this suffering. It's not just good storytelling to make this character go through all this bad stuff, and they go through it and it's just more bad stuff, right? People just want that character to have a nice, good ending, and that means that creates an incentive for you to have an emotionally satisfying story by making their life significantly better at that point at which they come out. And even if some bad stuff still happens, it's still likely to be significantly better for that person, because they still went through that climax, which means that you don't actually get those nuanced portrayals about how people that come out oftentimes even their life isn't actually significantly better, right? It isn't actually still that good, and they're not able to capture that nuance on their side of the house. The second main thing I want to say here is that person is always likely to give you more nuanced advice. I'm going to respond later to this stuff about nuanced media portrayals, but these are people who actually lived it, right? These are people who can actually have a proper discussion with you, far more than media which you can't interact with, which is a story made for mass appeal. And I think there are 2 other things I broadly want to say here. Firstly, you're unlikely to talk to these people on their side of the house because you already think that it will go well due to these media portrayals you got. But secondly, even if you access both, at the very least you don't have that bad pressure from media, and you're willing to have that good pressure from regular people. So that's my split point. Now responding to some of their stuff. So they said that this wasn't going to be overly positive and was just going to be negative things. Two main responses. Firstly, we explained why most would occur, but why most of the climax of the story would occur before they come out. So that part at the climax, that climax is when they come out. That's when most of the negative stuff happens before that. So therefore, all that emotional satisfaction would occur after that. But secondly, is that at the end, you always want it to be like net beneficial, right? After your character goes through this big struggle, there should be a clear goal at the end of that. There should be a clear, things ended up right at the end of that. That's just naturally what a good story is. So even if all we have is, even if that's all we have, at the very least, all forms of media will always portray coming out as net beneficial, even if they portray some of the harms, which means that people will internalize that coming out will always go well, even though there are instances where it does not always go well. It then said the media makes nuanced portrayals, but the problem is that the media doesn't have much time. There's only so much runtime in any given show or movie. It's oftentimes only a side plot, as the most accessible media tends to be the most appealing, which means that they don't just make a movie purely about LGBTQ+ people, it's just that there's an LGBTQ+ plotline. So they don't have that time in the story to make it particularly nuanced. It then said, I just want to quickly note, so I think that broadly responds to most of the case and explains to why these media portrayals are going to be bad. Before I move on to Wei, I'll take a point. No point moving on. Okay, so I already explained to you why people who come out can on our side. So at the very least, that main harm they've presented is mitigated. There are a couple things that you should weigh this against. First is that people don't want to come out. There are two main reasons as to why this is a large group of people. Firstly, it is just scary for a lot of people. There are a lot of people that see homophobia around them. It's not a thing that's particularly hidden, as I think is relatively intuitive. Secondly, is that people have multifaceted identities, and they don't see it as worth the risk when their sexuality isn't a big part of that identity. And no, there just are a lot of things that contribute to identity, like nationality, like religion, small clubs you do like debate, which make up your identity, and you don't want to risk it all for your sexuality. So that means that these people aren't likely to come out and engage with the movement, which leads to all those harms we talked about, them alienating from the movement, from them fracturing from the movement, and that movement not having that support, for them not accessing help from the movement, which can give them genuine advice on how to deal with their struggles, which they're not likely to access on their side of the house. Next, and the next main impact we have is that far more people are just likely to rush it. They're more likely to make poor decisions. They're more likely to, come out even in instances where it's going to lead to mass ostracization, where it's going to lead to your life becoming significantly worse, where it's going to lead to you becoming just more vulnerable to hate crimes because that's what your community demands. And even if this was the only benefit we got, this still wins us this debate because that is such a deep harm. People having to have their lives completely ruined. In their best case, they show that some people are a little more comfortable with coming out. On our side, we show that even if it's a smaller group of people, these people get completely ruined. You should weigh that far more highly just based on that massive magnitude.
I thank the speaker for their speech and now welcome the second speaker of the negative team.
Oh yeah, why are you forgetting on this one?
Starting my speech in 3, 2. When affirmative wants to have a narrow mindset on what the queer community actually represents. They want to not focus on actual cultural reasons, religious reasons, and the actual incentives that queer people actually face. They don't want them to feel safe with their families. They don't want them to actually feel like they belong in a community, even though they're probably within that queer community. They probably don't even feel like they're within that community because of internalized reasons. We tell you that you should stand for side negating. What will I do for you in my speech? One, I'm going to go over some like clarifications and like some like rebuttals on setup and like additionally on the counterfactual. Secondly, I'm then going to go over like some rebuttals I have for like around like buy-in. Thirdly, on like this idea of pressure and coming out. Then fourthly, I will then go on to my essential point on how the quality of media is actually effective and useful on our side. Okay, on to like the first idea. Before I move on, I will take a POI.
Should you be able to access the LGBTQ support networks even if you don't want to come out?
We tell you that like firstly, let's address the issue of coming out. We tell you that it's not a glorification, but we tell you it is an idea and like the intrinsic value of having someone actually feel and their feelings are validated through their action. It is not just mere coming out and saying to your parents that I am gay. No, it is telling and showing actual change that you are who you are because of what or who you like and are attracted to. No, I will get onto that later on. I will take no more POIs. Okay, now onto like this idea from setup. Okay, what did we hear from side negating? Oh, side affirmative. Like they told us like who are these people likely to make these films? They told us they're probably like privileged people and like they probably don't come from small demographics. Note a couple of responses. One, we tell you that people who are going to be making this are probably trailblazers within the queer community, such as probably Dominic Jackson, such as like those people, for example, the movie Pose, and how that is really a really important show for like people coming out. Secondly, we tell you that like sure they have to have an amount of privilege, but we tell you that trailblazers have already done and gone through the industry, shown their hard work, which is then really important for them to show out because that is part of their coming out journey. We note that coming out is never just a stage or an episode on a TV show part of it. We tell you that it's actually an adventure and a journey that is like contingent on, which is never able to be shown. Even if it is shown at their best case, it is probably just a small minority that they told us and set up, which is never able to get to the scale and the large impact that they are trying to get on in this debate. What other things do we have on the counterfactual? Jamie came up here and told you a couple of reasons as to why the counterfactual won't work. One, they'll just actually get backlash and boycott these shows, but we tell you that these shows are actually really interesting and dramatized. They told us that dramatization is actually really bad. Note, they still probably get more dramatization on the other side because now they probably actually have to make these characters more interesting because comparatively on people coming out, they actually do have a sense of motivations and audiences are more likely to watch the shows, whereas comparatively, they have no baseline. They've not told us what this baseline looks like. We also know that probably dramatization does worse on their side. The true message is never entailed. Therefore, we tell you that the message is lost. They do not get the outcomes that they're trying to tell you. No, now we're telling you like what also Jamie tried to tell you about hypersexualization, and this is not included within these reactions. Note that we tell you that like hypersexualization is actually a really stagnant thing within the queer community. We tell you that they're more likely because people probably already inherently know, like comparatively to the hypersexualization, which is well known, compared to the little thing that app is trying to tell you, which is where in fact they don't, like an average probably reasonable person doesn't know about. Therefore, we tell you that they're more likely to go over there because there's easier ways for it to be dramatized and to actually get into the reasons, which is really harmful on the counterfactual that they have to concede and better respond to. Okay, now onto this idea of like the social movement and like pressure from the for the actual person themselves. What did we hear from Nick? Like Nick told us like they won't be able to feel a part of it because they're not seen. Note like on their side, they're getting a larger scale of people who aren't being seen. Like we tell you that like they told us some mechanisms on like the glorification of coming out and why that is intrinsically bad. Because people feel like it is a way or like it is a necessary step. One, we tell you that like this they also told us that it's like overly positive, it's like a big deal, and it's like a narrative point of view and like how that is really bad. One, we tell you that it's not always positive and like it is actually promotes realistic values because people who are making them are the ones actually telling their stories because they can relate to larger communities within that queer community. Note then secondly, we also have the rise of people who wanting to show probably short films within staff for like students who can actually show them through their own stories. Therefore, you actually get better social networks and understanding within the small indigenous groups. Therefore, you get actually better conversations and nuanced ideologies being conversed. Note that this is probably like really like important. This could be, for example, like TikToks or like social media, for example, getting that out there into the wider community. We tell you that it actually provokes realistic ideas. Note they did say like at second, like even if they do have realistic outcomes, they don't get to the wider impact or like the risk to do so. We tell you that like actually they'll be able to have more nuanced ideas, because note, as I've already said, it is more about the journey and just on the outcome that they're trying to prove at first, on like uncomfortability, isolation, and losing out on people. We tell you that there actually is a larger range of support on our side. Note they sometimes like may get support, but then again, there's also contingent on the support that is currently in our status quo, which is what we stand for. That support actually never happens on their side because people were never able to come out in the first place. Like, we tell you that all of these large systems and benefits that we gain on our side were because people were able to show their journey and actually be able to know what people are like looking at for queer like people. This looks like probably like healthline systems or like, you know, trans awareness like things. Like these came from journeys of people coming out. They're never able to get there because they're only focusing on a small minority. Even if they do get there, they're not ever going to get the scale on that. Therefore, we weigh on the scale comparatively on the outside and how we get that, shutting that point down. Okay. Now onto like this idea of still coming out. Jamie told you a second, like, oh, they'll probably go on Twitter and so forth. I think if these queer people are like worried, they probably may not go on social media because one, they probably come from conservative religious families who don't even allow them to have social media. Even if they do have social media, they probably would just they won't go on this. I've already taken down the glorification idea and how it's not a terrible idea and how it's not overly positive. Therefore, that. On now to the essential point on the quality of media and how it is effective. Note, what do these queer people gravitate towards? They probably gravitate towards queer culture, probably like icons within the queer culture. They probably look at like shows like shows that actually show who like part of them. Note, I applaud the Affirmative team to go watch a queer show because it seems they're lacking there currently in this debate. One, we tell you that media and platforms like have better outreach obviously to these audience, therefore like the representation and movements are way better. On like just briefly on the counterfactual, as we've already told you, they're probably only focused on like relationships, thus fetishizations and hypersexualizations will be more adamant on the affirmative side because as they've already given some mechanisms, which we flipped, on like how media will portray that and dramatize it as such. Why then will media is better on our side? One, we tell you that they're more likely, like I've already explained who these people are making these shows. Those are like from the earlier rebuttals I said. Secondly, on like the media outreach and in terms of queer audiences, like they're actually able to show like not just flamboyancy and outrageous things, but also like narrative things that they're able to better to relate to in terms of relatability, in terms of like to get conservative impacts from this. Therefore, people are better able to understand. Therefore, if you stand for a side for queer people, stand for a side negating, proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for this speech, and now welcome the third speaker of the Affirmative team.
When coming out becomes a predominant feature of queer media, that's the point where we raise the barrier of entry to actually feel integrated in the LGBTQ plus movement, to feel integrated in the communities that can be one of your only support systems in a world of conservative dominance, in a world where you are literally not supported for your sexuality. That's something that we cannot support on our side. I think that we need to support our most vulnerable LGBTQ plus community members. Two things I'm going to do in this speech. First, I'm going to explain to you why there is worse portrayal of LGBTQ plus individuals on their side. Second, I'm going to explain to you why their side actually really harms the people who are like our most vulnerable members of the community, the members who don't feel like they can come out. Let's start off with portrayal. The first thing that they gave us was that there was going to be like just generally accurate portrayal. Two reasons why I don't think it's like that. Two reasons why I don't think it's super accurate. First of all, like, it's still the fact that every single show that is like being released is about coming out. There is some portion of coming out which creates like a notion that tells people that they have to come out in order to be part of the queer community. But second of all, like a lot of the time it is like pop culture figures catering for the most vocal members of the LGBTQ plus community, and not those who are a bit more scared to express their experiences due to like some sort of like negative experiences with coming out. What this means, why is this really, really bad? First of all, it portrays coming out as easier because the people that are likely to speak out are likely to be people who have had better experiences with coming out. This is like, this means that it's like, at the end of the day, coming out is not an easy thing. It is not a situation where everyone around you is supportive. Note that on their side, a majority of the media is portraying coming out as easy. They gave us a couple examples as to like some forms of media that do portray coming out as a more like hard experience in people's lives, but note that the majority of the media that is published is more surrounding the positive experiences with coming out, telling people that they should come out because they're going to they are going to see like so much support. Next, just on how they told us that coming out is a journey. Sure, but we don't think that that needs to be a focus of all LGBTQ plus media. That is, that like, we don't want every single show to be about coming out. It is good to have shows that don't have people coming out, that just have people covertly expressing their sexuality, because at the point at which we are literally restricting LGBTQ plus members and like forcing this high barrier to entry to be part of the movement and to be in this community, that's the harm that we really see on their side. Next, just on hypersexualization, 3 main responses to this. First of all, like, I think that like LGBTQ plus media just has the capacity to like publish media that isn't hypersexualization. You can publish some sort of like, you can publish a rom-com about a queer couple without that rom-com having to be hypersexualized. Note that like this debate does not have to have a distinction between heterosexual and homosexual media. That is, that like both have like equal capacity to portray things as romantic. Neither has to be super like hypersexualized. But next, also, if like media pop culture figures literally hypersexualize the LGBTQ plus individuals, Jamie told you why there's going to be so much backlash. That is, you're literally objectifying LGBTQ plus people, and that's something that people generally don't like every single person does not like, and are likely to speak out against, because that's just absolutely ludicrous to treat a like marginalized community like that. But third, like the stuff on like dramatization, right? Note that LGBTQ plus individuals can also just be interesting people. Their sexuality does not have to be the crux of their character. They can be a person with like really interesting thoughts, really interesting experiences that isn't just related to their own sexual identity. Note also that the counterfactual that Jamie has very clearly like rebuilt at second act also is like a reason why the hypersexualization just doesn't happen. Okay, what have I proven to you at the, oh, never mind, we have something else here. Next, just on how they told us that we're going to have no more like, oh, no. Next, okay, what have I proven to you at the end of this point? First, I've proven to you why there is just generally worse representation of LGBTQ plus individuals in the status quo. The impact of this is that there are literally more stereotypes and more restrictions, higher barriers to entry for literally every single LGBTQ plus member, because they feel like they have to come out in order to be part of the community, in order to be validated by the pop culture that they consume. This also leads to worse understanding from like a general person who is not part of the community. This looks like just generally buying into more stereotypes. This looks like reducing LGBTQ plus members to what pop culture tells them, because pop culture is so consistent with these stereotypes. We think that's really bad, because that means that like a lot of people who aren't part of the community think they know what's going on, but they actually don't. Okay, what this means at the end of this debate is that a lot of the material is literally contingent on good portrayal of LGBTQ plus members. Note that if they can't prove this, then most of the material does not stand at the end of this debate. But note that also, this isn't super important in terms of our material. Even if you don't buy that they get worse portrayal, we have material that is independent of that. I'll take a point now. No points? Okay, moving on. The first thing that next on like how we just harm the people, like LGBTQ plus individuals. The first thing they told us is that our side has no more coming out, and that means that no one cares about any LGBTQ plus person. Okay, two responses to this. First of all, coming out does not not originate from pop culture. We think it's actually the other way around. Pop culture exists because people finally feel comfortable with coming out and expressing their sexual identities. We think that that's logically prior, and we think that that's just not true. But second of all, Jamie explained why people come out on our side in a split. This was mostly unresponded to, left with insufficient response. That means that the stuff that they told us about helplines and helplines and trans healthcare is not actually mutually exclusive, because there's still awareness of the LGBTQ+ movement on our side, not mutually exclusive. The next thing they told us that coming out is a massive turning point. A couple of responses to this. First of all, it doesn't really matter if the coming out isn't done well. That is, if they are forced into coming out, it is actually doesn't have that much value. But second, it's never a necessity to actually come out. People should have the choice into whether or not they'll be able to come out, because they're still part of the community regardless. We shouldn't be portraying it as something that is a barrier. So at this point, it means that coming out as a turning point is as symmetric at next best, because people who want to come out can still come out. But at their worst, it is literally so much worse, because the turning point is literally receiving scrutiny from the people around you, whether it be conservative communities that don't accept you for your identity, or the people who heavily buy into pop culture telling you that you didn't come out in the right way. Next, just about support systems. Two responses to this. First of all, I think that pop culture is really consistent with stereotypes and how it wants people to come out. That means that there's going to be more of a framework as how do they expect people to come out. Why that's really bad is that they're less likely to be supportive if they don't come in the way that they think is conventionally realistic. But next, people aren't supportive when they force people to come out. This is literally akin to outing someone against their will. I think that's pretty bad and not very supportive. Note that even if the support system exists, it literally doesn't support our most vulnerable communities. Because the people who are stuck in conservative communities that are forced to make a trade-off between the LGBTQ+ community and their literal families, people who are stuck in identity crises because they don't know how they identify, they're still not being supported on their side. Why are they more important? They're important on the scale of vulnerability, because you literally are susceptible to drastic impact of one small move, and also compounding pressures from the people around you. But second, on depth, this is literally, if you come out, there's a chance that you can get kicked out, but if you don't come out, this means that you literally have no support system for a massive part of your identity that shapes a lot of the way that you live. On the comparative, on our side, you can come out if you want to, but note that it is more of a choice on our side, because there is no media forcing you to do that. That means that they do it better with better support systems, because also there is no rigid way as to how someone should come out. What have I proven to you at the end of this point? I've proven to you why on their side, LGBTQ+ people are less satisfied and less supported. The impact is that they generally feel unsafe, and they also feel like they have to make trade-offs between two important parts of their identities, or they feel like they have to do something in order to be part of a massive community that is a massive part of their identity. We went on this point independently, because it literally impacts the most vulnerable stakeholders in this debate. Stand with the people who can't feel like they don't feel like they're safe on the negative side. Stand with Affirmative.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and now welcome the third speaker of the negative team.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. This debate is not about coming out. This debate is about people feeling comfortable within their own skin. This debate is about those queer individuals who never had the capacity to come out, to be able to see that representation of people come out and know that everybody in this world doesn't actually hate them. Okay, what am I going to chat to you about in my speech? Firstly, about what this focus looks like. Secondly, on the counterfactual. Thirdly, on understanding queer individuals. And fourthly, on alienation. Okay, what does this focus look like? We tell you that this focus looks like one, like coming out in a film. And we also tell you this, right? Because coming out is not necessarily saying, Mom, I'm gay, or like a sit-down conversation. Coming out looks like the full journey of coming out. It looks like the internal dialogue that you're battling with inside of you, telling you that, you're going to be hated by all your family if they know that you are gay. We think that these are the types of representation that you get in film. Why is this? This is because film has an incentive to want to make things appealing to audiences, but we think that bad things tend to be more appealing to audiences because when you see characters struggle, when you see the lows of the lows, we think that is the type of thing that reaches queer audiences and audiences in general, right? And we know that the journey, the internal dialogue, and not actually coming out, but thinking about coming out, are all still very valid parts of coming out and the focus in this motion, right? The other thing that they note here is that this transition always looks positive. Again, no, people want drama, people want pain, people want all of the terrible things that actually happen to people in their lives because this is what's most interesting to consumers. But we also see that watching people be comfortable within themselves, right, is extremely heartwarming when you know that you're not really able to achieve that as a person. It's beautiful to see people embrace their sexuality, right? The last thing that they note here is that all you see, right? That all you see is people coming out. No, we think that the motion implies that there's a big focus. We don't think that it is necessarily all just about coming out. But note that even if majority of media, of queer media, does focus on coming out, we think that's valid, and we think that's a huge part about being queer, is questioning whether people would still love you if you were gay, is questioning whether your family would turn their back on you if they knew. Okay, secondly then, on the counterfactual, right? Note here that their counterfactual is the most heteronormative thing we've ever heard in our lives, right? Because it makes queer people seem as if they're just another person in society, and although that maybe that might look good from a I don't see color type of lens, I think there are clearly obvious differences on what a queer individual experiences compared to what the average individual experiences, right? We tell you that the counterfactual is likely to be relationships, right? And you're seen as just the relationships that you're in. We tell you this because first of all, again, people want drama. There's incentive for audiences oh my gosh, is this character gonna break up? What's happening between these two? Who's cheating on who? These types of things. They claim that the media is evil, but we wonder why the media is not evil in this sense. We already see that this thing still exists, right? They say the one response they have to that is that they're likely to experience backlash. First of all, there's lots of weird men and women who like seeing these types of things. Secondly, there's lots of people who still watch queer people who watch these things because it's cool. Fourthly, again, lots of drama. But fifthly, there's a lot of romanticization of actually being in a relationship, especially when that's so unattainable as a queer person because you want to see yourself represented on television, right? But note here, even if we take their characterization at their best, which is essentially you show queerness through just not openly saying it. If you don't openly say that you're queer, how are people likely to see queer people? How are people likely to know the characters are queer? Here's the answer, is that you showcase two girls kissing. You showcase, people dating each other. Because, how else are you supposed to know people are queer if they don't openly say that they're queer, right? And then the other thing that they note here is that they'll just show it, dismissively in heterosexual shows. So they basically just admitted to, making gay characters token gay characters. Okay. The last thing that they, the last thing to say here, right, is logical primacy, right? Because if they want to claim that they want to show queerness, but they're not openly saying it, then you need to openly admit to that queerness beforehand. Okay, now then on understanding queer individuals, note that this is a very important point because when queer individuals feel understood, they feel actually worthy in themselves. We think that's an extremely unique benefit that we get on our side of the house. Why is this? This is because people see themselves represented on television shows. Non-queer audiences understand and empathize with queer issues because they're able to see the struggles and the journeys of coming out, which is again a huge part of LGBTQ lives, which they completely negate and shut down, right? They also say that the way that they get essentially understanding is like people can talk to like other queer people. Note that it's contingent on people having those outlets. For example, in Catholic schools, they probably don't have a lot of queer people. It's probably heavily stigmatized. But note that they then say that you can reach out to like LGBTQ outlets. We also think that this is not really sufficient of a response. One, we think those outlets tend to be very like busy and like, you know, overconsumed as they are like outlets. But secondly, you know, you're probably also scared if your like conservative, scary parents are gonna check your internet history and things like that. That means then, when it comes to understanding queer individuals, when you take their counterfactual like at their best, right? Essentially when you just dismiss like relationships and it's just like, oh yeah, you're a queer person for like who you are and all of that like case by case basis things, it means that you just get like really low sort of watered down versions of what a queer relationship actually looks like and you get barely any nuance. Lastly then, on like alienation. Okay, they first state that people need to come out to be validated as queer. Like, I think the first response to this is like even if it is, I don't necessarily think it's like a huge part to be validated as being a queer person, because I think a lot of people when they come out, people just go like, oh, I already knew you were gay type of thing. But also, secondly, we think that it is a big part of being gay. You can't just turn down the fact that you're literally a part of a minority group and you can't, and it's something that you can keep to yourself, right? And you can't help but wonder if people would see you differently. It's a big part of being gay. But the second thing here is, like, the way that people get alienated through, like, our counterfactual is extremely worse even if you take all of the harms that they claim on us. Why? It's because if you see all of just like sexual relationships and romantic relationships, you have people either being like, that's so hot or that's so gross, right? You have people on both ends of the spectrum, which can be so polarizing. When you see people making those hate comments, people will internalize that and immediately project those hate comments on themselves. But then secondly, when you have people like, you know, actively trying to encourage like sexual relationships, and that's the only way you get validated like for being gay, that means that instead of like people feeling they need to come out, it's way worse because people feel like they need to constantly be in relationships to get validation, right? Note that we affect like a larger scale of people because not everybody's interested in being in a relationship, but everybody, a part of the queer community, wonders if people would think about them differently if people knew that they were gay, if like family members knew that they were gay. So if you're for understanding queer individuals, if you're against alienation, you have to side with opposition.
I thank the speaker for this speech. As customary, we now switch the speaking roles. I invite the leader of the negative team to give their reply.
My speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay. The 3 point of clash which I've identified in today's debate. Firstly, on how queer people will be alienated depending on the side of the house. Secondly, on what the counterfactual actually is. And then finally, on which side prevent pressure for queer people. Okay. Now I'll split these down firstly into alienation. The affirming side have come up here, and they told us that like people feel alienated if they don't come out, right? Film is always gonna portray like people with good of like there being a good ending when people come out, which is inaccurate, etc. Okay, what have the negating side told you in response to this? We tell you that firstly, film do showcase like negative reaction when coming out. This is because this is a true and accurate and like a very big part of many people who do come out, they receive negative reaction from it, and we have like had mechanism from third about why it actually is extremely likely that there'll be negative representation within the film industry, right? Where media showcases and it showcases an accurate representation. It doesn't just glorify coming out. We also tell you that in fact, we flip this on them, and people will feel alienated because which I'll later talk about for the counterfactual, where under their side of the house, like queer people is gonna be extremely like hypersexualized, or they're gonna be like feel like they must be in a relationship to be worthy as a queer person, right? They'll feel alienated if they're not in a relationship most of the time, especially asexual relationship, right? And then this is like extremely important, especially on the scale of metric, on the metric of scale, because like even if people do not come out, we still support every queer person when there is a focus on coming out, because like even if they don't come out, they can still like watch the process of like them leading up to it, right? And then they'll still feel supported from this. But on this side of the house, like relationship, this doesn't affect everybody, especially like asexual people. This like asexual people is gonna feel alienated and locked out from this, right? And we also tell you that like just because like even if media was to, let's say, glorify coming out, this doesn't mean that like they're telling people to go and come out themselves, but it just shows that there could be positive reaction from coming out. It shows that like there is like a shift within society where there is more positive mentality, there is support for people who come out in cases, right? Okay, that's why we want on that point. Okay, secondly, on the counterfactual, they come up here and they told us, actually we told you we gave mechanism on why like there will be extreme like hypersexualization of these people. Like either there's gonna be two situations where like people was gonna be like, oh that's so hot, or oh that's so gross, and then like in both cases it's like extreme side of the scale, and like both sides is like extremely horrible, right? But then they come up here and they told us that like people will not actually be hypersexualized and they'll focus on something else. We gave very good mechanism at third about like how like hypersexualization will still occur, etc. And that's yeah. And then finally on like preventing pressure for queer people, right? We've told you about how like people are no longer, they don't have to feel pressure in engaging in sexual relationship, and like etc. Even if let's say like some amount of people were pressured to come out, we still feel that we weigh that there's like a metric scale of good of large amount of people who are benefited. Okay, so overall through all of this, right? Like we get the impact of people feeling supported in coming out. We went on the metric of like severity and scale, and they're not gonna be alienated, etc. But even if like people, even if or most of you don't believe most of these point of clash, we still win, because we were able to show you the logical primacy of when people feel that they're supported to come out, they're gonna like be able to go out and like do more good and like create a better image for the queer society, and that's what we stand for on the Negating side. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for their speech. I now invite the leader of the Affirmative team to close the case.
Side negating have already internalized the idea that coming out is a necessary part of being an LGBTQ person. Note that this debate is not about portraying gay people overall in media. It's specifically about portraying the extent to which coming out matters. That's something we rejected. That's the point at which they were unable to engage with our material about how people are isolated when coming out is the norm, and the prevalence of it depicted, and like the prevalence of which it's depicted in media, how it destroys the movement. The point they weren't able to engage with that, I think we've won this debate. I'm going to talk about two things. First is about the role of coming out for LGBTQ people. What we explained down the line is that the process of coming out is not an integral part of being LGBT. That is to say, you can be gay, and you can interact with gay people, you can date guys, and you don't necessarily have to go through this process of coming out. Let's say I theoretically never went through the inner turmoil of trying to explain to my friends and family that I'm gay, but I just covertly started dating guys. I think the point at which we tell you that you're still a valuable member of the LGBTQ movement is, I think the point at which that matters is the point at which coming out doesn't have innate value of its own. What does making coming out so necessary in the media mean then? Two things. First is about the people who don't want to come out. That is to say that these individuals who are either unable to come out or are unable to buy into the narrative that coming out is necessary, these people are often disconnected from their movement. We told you that's really harmful insofar as these individuals lose out on a very strong support network that could be found within the movement. Or for example, this fractures the LGBTQ movement insofar as its internal divide. I think the point at which these people literally don't feel like they're gay because they've never gone through this process, because explicitly the media portrays it as so integral, is I think the point at which those individuals are incredibly damaged. Next, it was about the people being pressured to come out, right? That is, these individuals are often pressured in many ways to just come out. I think the point at which these individuals might exercise a lot of harm to themselves, the point at which they do this unjustly, is I think the point at which is akin to coercion, it's akin to violence. I think that's the point at which these people don't actually have, I think the point at which the media depiction is incredibly damaging. I think that this, just weighing up against a lot of the material about how media depicts coming out, I think they explain why, a lot of media just forces individuals to feel like they're going into relationships. I think honestly the point at which media forces them to do things that are actively against their harm or alienate them from the society is I think the point at which media is incredibly more damaging to them. Okay, secondly then is about what do we think media looks like on the counterfactual? So Negating made a big push about how the counterfactual that exists is probably going to be based on hypersexualization. Honestly, we gave you a lot of incentives as to why that's probably not the case. We told you and Jamie that firstly, there's probably going to be a lot of backlash, but I think also just a lot of people who are gay are just romantic people. I don't think they often care about sex to the degree that they care about. Honestly, I think the point at which media only cares about sex is just something that's not likely to be true. We'll look at Heartstopper, right? It's something that's incredibly romantic. The point at which they claim that the moment the coming out part is removed from that story is the point at which it's just fully based on sex is I think incredibly disingenuous. Noting the fact that romantic media exists means that these individuals are probably able to get they're able to get representation. They're able to get representation in ways that appeal to not only themselves but a lot of their friends and family. I think that's the point at which it matters. How should you judge this debate then? Note that I think it's far more important that people are literally stripped of their autonomy, the point at which there are so many pressures to be, to come out. I think the point at which they weren't able to prove that coming out is fundamentally a benefit to the movement. Instead, we're able to explain to you why it's incredibly damaging to these individuals to feel the need to be able to do this. I think weighing up the severity of not having a community to be connected to, not having a support network to go to, potentially isolating yourself from your own family, from your own faith, I think that's the point at which that weighs incredibly far more highly than any of the material they gave us on that side. Even if you do believe that we are going to have individuals who feel pressure to go into relationships, even if you do feel as though even to a certain degree that it does become more hypersexualized, I think the point at which we're able to let people feel better about being themselves, I think that's the point at which we've done this debate. I'm very, very proud to affirm.
I thank the speaker for this speech, and I invite both teams to cross the floor and shake hands.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Very good debate.
Good debate, good debate.
Excellent, excellent.
Great debate, great debate.
You spoke so well.
We're checking out with all the coaches. It's like watching your little Pokemons go battle. And then
At least mine. You know, that is the perfect thing.